Prologue. If I were given the chance to save every child in Calator by bringing them to Aresavita to grow along with my own blood, I would choose instead to bring only half, for the blood of Sognanti innocence has strained through the clenched fists of their elders into their youthful hands. The Shalatari must face the historical reckoning of Imbera. May Hovan have mercy on their spirits. King Armand II, 92 days after the first sundering. On the day he died, Henry woke to the blare of trumpets, ripping him from his restless sleep as he gasped for air. Heart pounding, his hands grasped at his throat, scrambling to peel the ghost of his father's fingers from his throat that felt so real just moments ago. His chest heaved as he realized the familiar burn of breathing through a strangled windpipe was absent, although his nightmare had worked him up enough for him to hyperventilate. Fist clenched the threadbare blanket beneath him, eyelids fluttering as his vision adjusted to the light. His skin prickled as a shiver buzzed down his spine, unsure of whether it was from the chill of the battlefield or if his body was still suffering the effect of the stress from what he'd just relived in his sleep. As his breathing slowed, he scanned the weathered canvas tent for danger. He flicked his eyes in the usual order: the mouth of the tent, his escape route, and to check for any assailants that could be silhouetted by daybreak in the entryway, ready to duck their head down, step into the tent, and kill him where he slept, then to the tattered holes at the top of the tent from surviving the elements. They were windows to the thick fog that hung outside in the atmosphere. The dawn of the day filtering through the thin fabric was the closest thing to a working timepiece he had, since his grandfather's pocket watch was once crushed under the foot of a particularly feisty soldier who woke from his stupor while Henry was trying to tie up the last suture on a nasty forehead gash he got from a barroom brawl. Once, twice, then 3 times he looked back and forth between the two, his gaze a nervous metronome as he completed his morning ritual. You good? His hand instinctively grabbed for his sword, head whipping in the direction of the raspy voice. A set of Fenarian antlers were silhouetted in the dark as his bunkmate sat up, his long, tapering ears twitching in the direction of the trumpet's tune. Henry coughed into his hand and shifted away from his weapon, hoping that he hadn't been caught with his hand on the hilt of his sword as if he were ready to turn his roommate into venison. Never better, he said, running a hand over his cropped hair, which, like everything else in the tent, was almost always damp when he woke. There was never any escape from the muggy weather on the border between Calator and Embera, an unpleasant consequence of the Shalatari protection war that kept everything, soldiers, animals, civilians, water, out, effectively damming the rainwater that would otherwise continue down the Emberian hills and into the valleys of Calator. He wiped his brow, shuddering at the film of moisture that laid in a thin layer on top of his skin, before jumping to his feet. Craning his neck and bending at the knees, he assumed the same half-crouch he was forced to do every morning, so his head only grazed the canvas ceiling. His lungs screamed for air, but he forced his breathing to slow and cleared his throat, grabbing his uniform and grimacing at the feel of the wet fabric as he got dressed. Good morning to you too, the other man quipped, stretching his arms above his head with a yawn. I thought you'd be used to the reveille by now. Henry puffed his cheeks and let out a slow breath. I'm fine, Al, just an upset stomach this morning. He grabbed his satchel off the overturned wooden medical crate that they used as a makeshift nightstand and slung it over his shoulder. I'm headed for the mess hall. I'll see you around. Al's response echoed from behind him as he ducked his head out of the tent, eyes wide and blinking as he ventured into the clearing. Fog, thick and viscous, blurred into the muted watercolor of the early morning sky. Drawing in deep, shaky breaths, Henry trudged forward, acutely aware of the whisper of boots through tall grass, red tunics dotting the makeshift barracks as groggy soldiers emerged from their tents. Most mornings his fellow soldiers greeted him with a sneer, looking up at him as their delicate features contorted at the sight of him. It was only natural that the Emberian royal army consisted almost entirely of Sognanti, as their people were native to the land and made up the majority of the Emberian denizens. Even though he grew up the only Shalatari kid in the quarters, he attended school with Sognanti and would even venture to say that, for whatever reason, he was popular among his peers. But that all changed after the second sundering 5 years ago. People he'd known for years stopped speaking to him, avoiding eye contact and turning away if he waved his hand to say hello. Everywhere he turned, former classmates, friends, acquaintances, nobody wanted anything to do with him. Even Esther broke up with him, which was admittedly more of a relief than anything, but it still stung. Back then, even as he towered over the vast majority of the Sognanti around him, he'd never felt so small in his life. At the same time, he's never felt so tall either. He stood out like the lone tree in a field waiting for lightning to strike and put him out of his misery. There was no hiding his annoyingly lanky build or tawny skin, his Shalatari features apparently serving as enough to brand him as a traitor. It took a few years, but he got used to the Sognanti's newfound disdain for him and anybody else unfortunate enough to be a Shalatari living in Embera. They gossiped amongst themselves without ever opening their mouths, tapping into each other's minds in the way that only Sogs could. The quirk of a dark brow from one, the downwards twitch of a scowl from another. It didn't take much imagination for him to fill in the blanks. Their arms were covered in those damn hideous flecks, faintly glowing with mana as if to mock him. See, you don't belong here. But this morning wasn't like every other morning. Few Sognanti glowed through the fog, their biolight flickering in a nervous cadence as he lost himself in the glowing crowd. They flocked together one by one and began to trudge through the waterlogged terrain towards the mess hall. There would be no sparring, laughter at the local pub, or commanders coming to blows over differences in strategy. Many of them won't be alive by tomorrow's dawn. Henry and Al joined their fellow soldiers in formation. Henry swayed on his feet, the world swimming around him as the general's barked orders faded into the background. He'd only served in the reserves before this, which consisted of a lot of half-assed combat training, and even more standing around with his hands in his pockets, stationed near battles between Emberian and Kalatoran forces in case they ran out of active-duty soldiers to use as cannon fodder. Eventually, he'd fallen into a medic role, laying his hands on bloody stumps and gashes from swords, using Shalatari healing mana to weave flesh back together and, if he could figure out where it was coming from, stop bleeding by mending severed veins and arteries. It was hard trying to perform intricate, painful healing spells as the patients writhed on the ground and screamed. Sometimes their eyes would be so wide with fear, their minds clouded by pain and adrenaline, that they would look past the red uniforms he wore and would only see his olive-toned skin. Once a Sog had kicked him square in the stomach as he was trying to slow the bleeding from the bloody stump left after a Kalatoran soldier ripped his arm clean from the joint. Leaving a river of blood in his wake, he stumbled away from the medic station before collapsing a few paces away. By the time Henry reached the man and rolled him onto his back, it was already too late. He vomited in between each patient for the first week, taking the blows from dying men as they used the last of their spirits to fight against a comrade in a disoriented haze. Then one shift, as he was attempting to weave a writhing soldier's wound closed, the wails and glancing blows stopped. The horrors of war echoed in the background as he looked up, expecting to find that the patient had expired, only to find a scrawny, waif-like Sog by his patient's head, fingers ghosting over the man's temples, the celestial flecks on his arms glowing through layers of filth. The wounded soldier's eyes glowed with the same ethereal light, brightness pulsing in rhythm with the iridescent droplets that trailed up the Dreamcaster's arms. "He's out," the Dreamcaster muttered. "Work quickly." The days bled together after that. The Dreamcaster, called Aldo, faithfully attended to the patients alongside him, putting the wounded under his haze, watching strands of ashen Sognanti flesh weave together as Henry concentrated his mana through the palms of his hand and into the gaping wounds left by griffin claws, Shalatari hands, or whatever other horror they witnessed as they were mowed down by Kalatoran forces. Aldo grew up in Benva di Tudo, just across the border from his own hometown. His eldest sister married into the Altuffa family, well known for their thriving orchard and tavern down the road from his Uncle Timur's place, Booston and Barrel. "Free drinks for life, as many as I want every solstice," Aldo told him. "Have you tried their sharbat? Oh, my Hoven, I think that I might love my brother-in-law more than my sister at this point." Henry's mouth ran dry at the memory of the chilled beverage, the tart of the pomegranate perfectly complemented by the sweet, aromatic rosewater with hints of warm saffron. He'd only gone for stronger drinks at Booston and Barrel in recent years. Perhaps he'd grab some sharbat next time he visited his uncle's. Now he doubted he'd live to see the chance. His days spent healing came to an end when they ran out of warm bodies to put on the front lines and transferred most of the medical specialists to combat-facing roles.